Hi, I'm Nat.
And I'm Guy. And AI and our corporate overlords, as well as Canada's empty graves and burning churches, as well as BBC's The Fading Institution of Censorship, as well as all the other headlines of the day. Every day, Monday through Friday at 9:15 Central, you're live with Nat and the Guy.
Hello.
If you haven't subscribed, please do so. The first 1,000 subscribers are really the most important to any content creator. Those first 1,000 is what gets us to monetization. So if you can do us a favor and subscribe, well, let's get into it.
Yes, thank you so much. Also, thank you to everybody that's coming over from my live in Spanish, which just finished at 8 Central Time on our Spanish channel, if you're a Spanish speaker.
And one more thing, we're going to be starting to clip, so we're trying to segment each subject matter. So you may see us take a break between subject matters until we kind of get the wheels greased and we figure out how to do everything.
And that's when we'll read your comments, so please do leave them because we're always very interested to know what you all think as well.
Okay.
Otherwise, there's no show.
No, keep it here. BBC and the Fading Institution of Censorship. Let's get into it. Okay, and the first article, why don't you get into the headline here? And the first article is the most important in these series of articles we're about to lay out about the BBC.
So from Variety, BBC throws up website paywall for US users.
Okay, let's get into it. And I have a theory about this, why they're actually throwing up a paywall for US users. It's not because they want to make money. I believe it's because the BBC is putting a lot of propaganda out there for the UK public. There are a lot of censorship laws in the UK, so it's hard for independent content creators to call out the BBC very often without a lawsuit, them being entangled in a lawsuit, let's say. US content creators have freedom of speech laws. They very often take these BBC stories that the BBC is lying about, make news articles about it. The UK population picks up on this independent content creation, and it really destroys the BBC's reputation. So I think they're trying to keep up gates to keep out the U.S. public and independent content creators from really looking at what they're putting out there.
Online news and programming from UK's biggest broadcaster will carry a prize for some American fans. BBC Studios and BBC News have launched the first phase of a pay model for BBC.com in the US. US users of BBC.com who choose not to pay will still have access to select global breaking news stories, as well as BBC Radio 4 and BBC World Service Radio live streams, BBC World Service languages sites, and a variety of free newsletters and podcasts, the BBC said.
And the BBC is funded by the government. It is a lot of government propaganda. We're going to kind of lay this out in this segment. We're not the only ones that have noticed it. I think just about everybody has. One of the more egregious companies other than the BBC is really the CBC, which is the Canadian propaganda news. Okay, let's keep going here. Do you have any thoughts on this so far?
But having lived in Canada for 13 years, we were very well aware of state-sponsored media, which is essentially just subsidized by the government. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to exist. And with the BBC, there's also been a very obvious capture of it by a certain type of ideology.
Yeah, and they fund the BBC by putting a tax on every single TV or computer screen that is sold in the UK. So there's a specific tax by the government to fund the BBC. Okay, let's continue to go here.
The initial phase of the BBC's paywall launch, the subscription cost will cost $8.899 a month or $49.99 per year. US users who sign for a subscription will get unlimited access to the BBC's news articles, feature stories, and the 24/7 live stream of the BBC News channel in the coming months as we test and learn from audience consumption, the BBC said. Basically none. Ad-free documentary series and films, including...
Hold on. What's going on here? $49.99. That's a little bit steep, number one. But number two, they're going to put a regional pricing on this thing, and they're not going to charge anybody in the EU or the British. This seems like they're trying to keep American audiences out. I kind of said that a moment ago, but I just want to reiterate it.
Should I keep going? Or
yeah, let's... you can skip down a little bit. I want to see if they have a paywall for any other countries here.
No. So for those in the UK, there will be no charge to the services. All the content available on BBC.com is also available to UK audiences through BBC's various channels and services. The BBC also has no current plans to introduce a pay model for the website outside of North America. Does that count Mexico? Because technically Mexico is North America. And does that count Canada? Because Canada is part of the Commonwealth.
So they're saying they're going to charge North America or America?
They have no plans to introduce a pay model for the website outside of North America. But I don't know what they count as North America.
Yeah, usually that's going to include Canada and the U.S. Very often when they say North America, even though Mexico is North America, it's left out. Why do I know this? Because I recently covered the kind of Adobe scandal and their pay model. They're introducing a pay model that's specific to North America. That would be Canada and the U.S. And then they're going to roll it out perhaps more broadly once that audience kind of accepts the new pay model. So,
but, I mean, would it include Canada? Because once again, Canada is part of the Commonwealth, has a king.
I also think that my theory is that they want to keep independent U.S. content creators out of it because they're protected by freedom of speech laws, and Canadian content creators are kind of already manipulated by the Canadian government and knows how this system works. So I don't think they're as concerned about Canadians, but when we do find out, I will give the update on that story because I'll ask some of the people that we still know in Canada to go to the website and see if they do make them pay there.
Because it hasn't been implemented yet. But so now it says saying several major US-based news outlets also have paywalls, including all the news sites nobody wants to see. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, CNN installed a paywall last fall for his website, with heavier users prompted to pay $39.99 a month for access. In the US, the BBC is employing a dynamic pay model to determine access to the BBC.com. Using this method, all users visiting the site from within the US will be assessed based on how they interact with our content, including how much they read and how long they stay. According to the BBC, this approach allows casual readers to explore freely while offering our most engaged users the opportunity to unlock even more. So they're charging more money to the people that stay longer on their site.
Well, I'm also wondering...
That's weird.
I'm also wondering if you use a VPN... Are you just going to go right around this payment?
Yeah, that too.
That would make perfect sense.
Unless, I mean, there are some sites and some companies that are able to circumvent the VPN and can detect it when you're using it. So
yeah. Okay, before we get into the next part of this segment about the BBC, we will read all the comments once we're done the entire segment, just so people do kind of know. Okay, let's go into the next part of this, and I believe it is a clip.
Yes, so from Konstantin Kisin.
Yeah, and if you don't know Konstantin Kisin, he very often has really good takes. Some of his takes are really bad, but in this particular case, I do agree with him. And he is from the UK, right?
He immigrated to the UK from Russia a long time ago when he was a kid, which is why he speaks so strongly against socialism and communism and all of those ideas and censorship. But yes, he is from his UK based.
Okay, well, let's go into this. Let me grab my headphones real quick.
Same.
And what's the name of his podcast again?
So Konstantin Kisin's podcast is called Trigonometry, and here he is talking to Andrew Gold from Heretics.
Yeah, and
both of them from the UK.
Trigonometry does get a lot of big intellectual guests and things like this, and it is long format, so you very often get to see a lot of the thought process of these intellectuals, and very often it falls apart under questioning. Okay, let's... And
also Andrew Gold's show, which is what we're going to watch right now, is also really good. I don't agree with everything he says, but he also has very interesting guests.
Yeah.
I don't think BBC presenters should be political in that way. But it's interesting because it's one of the fascinating things about the BBC, whereby you've had this great institution, which is what the BBC is, a great institution. There was the gold standard of journalism for a very long time. And then at some point that must have changed. And I know because I've spoken to people who left around the time that it did change. And they said it was no longer about journalism. It now became...
And I think a lot of people think this happened in the United States as well. But I have a different view because I've looked at the history of mainstream media and things like this, and there's always been a level of capture. It's just brought to a whole new level recently after the jibby jab era. I would say it's almost unbelievable now.
Ideology. But then the pretense of it being the gold standard of journalism remained. And so you had for some time these people like Andrew Marr, like Emily Maitlis and others who were working at the BBC and being these independent, neutral journalists. And then they all left the BBC and started their own podcasts. And now you know what they really think.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Now you know what they really think, and the news media has kind of been exposed, and the news media are taking steps to go hire these independent content creators so they can kind of reformat their own validity and things like this.
Because again, he has the main point is that the BBC, the CNN, all of these outlets that used to be doing actual journalism, a lot of people stayed with that idea, but then they started getting transfixed into ideology very quickly, and a lot of people didn't notice.
There's mass psyops being conducted by the mainstream media, and this is very obvious within Canada, and the Canadian military came out and has recently said it because there was documents that uncovered this during the Jibby Jab era again. And this wasn't just in Canada. In Canada, it was just uncovered, and government officials actually admitted to it.
And you go, these people aren't independent at all. And there's no possible way that Emily Maitlis, who can't wrap her head around people wanting to lower migration and has to call everyone racist when they do, there is no possible way that that woman is capable of journalistic independence. That's physically not possible. So I think we've kind of been gaslit for a while about this stuff. And that's the presenters, right?
That was the majority of the sense I wanted to kind of put out there.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have anything so far, or do you want to go in the next clip with Elon Musk? And this is when the BBC really tried to interrogate Elon Musk and come after him. Elon Musk is very socially savvy when it comes to things like Twitter and interviews and things like this, even though he is somewhat autistic.
X.
Okay.
Next one.
Yeah, let's bring this thing up.
So
Why don't you read a little bit of
Wide
it?
Awake Media, this is what they're going to say, but I don't know how YouTube's going to because they still censor these kinds of words. But the BBC asks, you changed the bad times misinformation labels. Why do that? Elon Musk said, does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and the side effects of jibby jabs? The BBC says, let's talk about something else. Elon Musk says, you weren't expecting that.
And this is the thing. When you actually start questioning them back on their own narrative, they want to change the subject and get away from it as quick as possible. We're going to pause this quite a bit because we do not want to get dinged with, what do you call it?
Censorship? Copyright.
Copyright.
But also censorship. Because they're going to say the words that we're not supposed to say, but okay.
Yeah, it's fine. We'll just take a risk today.
COVID misinformation. You changed the COVID misinformation
Has
rules.
BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter, so I'm asking you.
No, I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, and then it disappeared. Why do that?
Pause it. And it's that silence that really gets these reporters, after he asks a question, he just remains silent and looks right at him, which kind of grinds the gears to make the interviewer say something, especially if Musk isn't going to say anything.
COVID is no longer an issue. Does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and side effects of vaccinations? And not reporting on that at all? And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
This is not an interview about the BBC.
Oh, so. You thought it wasn't?
I see now why you've done Twitter Spaces. I am not a representative of the BBC's editorial policy. I want to make that clear. Let's talk about something else. If you want to talk about the BBC,
you too.
All right, let's talk about something else.
You weren't expecting that.
Let's talk about something else.
Okay, so that was 3. Let's talk about something else.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about something else. Like you can see, he got extremely nervous there.
And a lot of them, I mean, I don't always attribute malice when stupidity can be the reason for someone's actions. But in the case of the BBC, of journalists, of people that actually should do research and investigation and look into things. I would say a lot of people did get marching orders from higher on up, and they just had to listen because it was their jobs. But when you're a journalist, when you're an investigative reporter, or have anything to do with giving the news to the people, it is your duty as a journalist to tell the truth, which they've forgotten about completely.
Well, that higher up was the WHO, and then it went out to the governments, the marching orders, and then that went down to the mainstream media. We're going to go into a story later when we go to RUMBLE about Tedros completely denying everything they did during that era. Okay, let's go into the next part of this expose on BBC.
So from Tommy Robinson, recently released from jail for telling the truth, the White House is calling out fake news BBC to their faces. Hey, hold on, I'm stuck. Okay.
And the Americans are really going after UK and EU media because what they used to be was bastions of free speech, just like the US was, and now they seem to have a completely different take on it. They're very pro-censorship.
In the media, we don't take the word of Hamas with total truth. We like to look into it when they speak. Unlike the BBC, who had multiple headlines, they wrote, Israeli tank kills 26, Israeli tank kills 21, Israeli gunfire kills 31, Red Cross says 21 people were killed in an aid incident, and then, oh wait, they had to correct and take down their entire story, saying we reviewed the footage and couldn't find any evidence of anything. Oh. Okay, so we're going to look into reports before we confirm them from this podium or before we take action, and I suggest that journalists who actually care about truth do the same to some in the media.
Okay,
Well, the thing is, not a lot of journalists care about the truth. They care about spreading propaganda message that sometimes they don't even understand themselves.
Well, and they want to control the narrative, so they want to get their messaging out first, even if it is a lie. That's been the new strategy of these progressives and these globalists. They want to control the narrative, so they think whoever's first to the mic really is dictating what's going to be said. But that's not the case because the independent media now just picks this stuff apart, like me and you, and like a lot of other channels.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, from the BBC, or the BBC story,
Yep.
you also put this in there from Maverick X, saying...
Yeah, and need we not forget the Jibby Jab era, the 9/11 era, this era. People tend to forget all these things that these governments were involved in. And I just found this extremely interesting because I very often don't think about this era sometimes. But when it's put in front of your face, there's really only one conclusion you can come to.
So isn't it funny how BBC and CNN journalists could find Osama... space, Bin Laden, for interviews, but the American government couldn't find him for years.
Yeah. Isn't that just crazy? Anytime they wanted to interview the guy, they could just find him right off the bat. Mm-hmm. But the U.S. government, the strongest military and intelligence services in the world, just can't seem to find him. A lot of the CNN journalists do work for the U.S. government, and this has come out in different documents. So it's very interesting.
Yes.
And yeah.
But, I mean...
Also, National Geographic is one of those magazines that it came out that it was a lot of intelligence agents that worked for National Geographic itself. It was a huge scandal quite a few years ago.
National Geographic.
Yeah. Thanks for your correction.
You're welcome.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, state-run media, state-sponsored media continues to try and is giving, I think, its last... having its last breaths before there's a full-on revolution. The revolution continues for alternative media, but at the same time, we talked about it yesterday, there are a lot of stories about traditional media, so-called, coming into spaces where content creators are creating truth and or trying to, like YouTube, where now traditional media is putting up videos and YouTube is helping push it to audiences, whilst content creators that are independent or have differing opinions, they're seeing their content that used to get hundreds of thousands of views diminish very quickly in the past 2 to 3 weeks when this push started on YouTube. So it's interesting that maybe YouTube will now merge with traditional media and give them the space to continue their lives.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know what was going on there.
I was giving an opinion.
Okay.
We do this every night. Did you forget?
You were just so beautiful, I couldn't take my eyes off of you.
Shut up.
Okay, before we do go into the next topic here or the next segment, let's see, there is one comment.
Yes. So Rafa, hello Rafa. I still owe you an email.
Oh, let's go to the two-shot here.
This is a two-shot.
The big two-shot.
I don't have that one.
It's called both.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Sorry. Hello, Rafa. I still owe you an email. Hope you're doing well. And Rafa says, hello, I missed the Diego Moon story. You didn't miss much. Just his stupidity and idiocy regarding wanting to be more and more woke as the day is.
Yeah, but you did go pretty in-depth on there because I thought it was
Well,
gonna
because
be
I
like
went through the whole story.
Yeah, well, and then a lot of it attached documents and stories as well. So
Well, not that in depth.
it was pretty in-depth.
Just showing how, I mean, Trump is the president that has done the least amount of deportations out of the past other ones for the past 30 years.
Yeah, but you didn't show the
It's
graph
significant.
of total deportations. You did internal deportations, which is actually different numbers, so they're much less.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to find the other one and I couldn't find it. We've used it in the show before, but
But it wasn't, you went in an hour in depth, so it was in depth, whether you think it was or not. Yeah.
Rafa asks, is Guy always that romantic, Nat? No.
Always.
No.
Always. Flowers and balloons every day.
At the beginning he used to, but I don't like flowers. And it's something he just doesn't understand.
Okay, let's go into our next segment here.
Like chocolates are so much better than flowers. I'd way rather have something I can eat.
She likes anything with sugar. That's just the way it is.
That too. But yeah, any girl likes chocolates better than flowers, in my opinion.
Fat girls. Not that you're fat, but fat girls generally like chocolates over flowers.
No,
Or
normal people.
Or they like
Normal
chocolate
girls.
flowers.
Oh, yes. That would be a good idea. But no, he's not always that romantic.
Okay, let's go into the next topic, and that's AI and our corporate overlords. And let's go into the story
Okay.
here.
Oops. So from the AP, judge dismisses author's copyright lawsuit against Meta over AI training.
Okay, and I should have said before we go into this one that we got a series of stories and judgments that have recently come down in the last few days that look like the government or the law or the institutions are really siding with the corporations and siding with them to, it's okay for them to train off other people's creative works. So this is very interesting. We were kind of waiting for these to come in, and they're coming in succession. And a lot of people and lawsuits around the world that are currently going on after these three judgments came in are either dropping their lawsuits or expecting it to go the way of the corporation here. Okay, let's get into it.
A federal judge sided with Facebook parent Meta Platforms in dismissing a copyright infringement lawsuit from a group of authors who accused the company of stealing their works to train its artificial intelligence technology. The Wednesday ruling from U.S. District Judge Vince Chabria was the second in a week from San Francisco's federal court to dismiss major copyright claims from book authors against the rapidly developing AI industry. Chabria found that 13 authors who sued Meta made the wrong arguments and tossed the case, but the judge also said that the ruling is limited to authors in the case and does not mean that Meta's use of copyrighted materials is lawful. The ruling does not stand for the proposition.
Okay, and let's hold it there, and then we'll continue.
Okay.
That being said, Meta is one of these big companies, one of these big conglomerates in the United States, where if the ruling comes down on their side, I would expect a lot more rulings to go the way of Google, Microsoft, other companies like this. We're mainly looking at what's going to happen in the US and in China. So both these governments are the two major governments that are going to be controlling AI and putting these AI platforms out there. So it's going to be interesting what happens in those two countries, because that's going to dictate how much data they can put into these training models in order to train them. Okay, let's continue. Or we can go down the article a little bit.
Where?
Right there. Although Meta
prevailed in its request to dismiss the case, it could turn out to be a Pyrrhic victory. In his 40-page ruling, Chabria repeatedly indicated reasons to believe that Meta and other AI companies have turned into serial copyright infringers as they train their technology on books and other works created by humans, and seem to be inviting other authors to bring cases to his court presented in a manner that would allow them to proceed to trial.
Yeah, and we're going to get into the other two cases in just a minute, but this is going to discourage a lot of people from bringing lawsuits because these things are expensive. They already have the best lawyers, and now they have precedent on their side. So,
Yes.
okay, let's go into the second story. Do you have any thoughts on this so far?
No, I don't like AI.
Well, why don't you talk about not liking AI a little
Well, I'll
bit?
talk about it after.
Okay.
So Getty drops copyright allegations in UK lawsuit against Stability AI. Getty Images, who is also loves to be involved in lawsuits.
And a lot of these lawsuits are coming from creatives. This was the first kind of segment of knowledge that AI kind of went into, was picture, video, things like this. So this is where the first lawsuits kind of emerge. But I'm expecting lawsuits in other fields to eventually emerge. Also, though, you do have the individual artist saying he has rights to his work. So it seemed like this would be the most likely place where the small creator could win against the corporation. Okay, let's continue here.
Getty Images dropped copyright infringement allegations from its lawsuit against artificial intelligence company Stability AI as closing arguments began Wednesday in the landmark case at Britain's High Court. Seattle-based, of course it's Seattle. Getty's decision to abandon the copyright claim removes a key part of its lawsuit against Stability AI, which owns a popular AI image-making tool called Stable Diffusion. The two have been facing off in a widely watched court case that could have implications for the creative and technology industries. Tech companies have been training their AI systems on vast troves of writings and images available online. Getty was among the first to challenge those practices with copyright infringement lawsuits in the US and the UK in early 2023.
Okay, let's drop down to the end of the article and just see if anything else is said here.
Meh. No, I don't want to encourage
Don't
the AP.
Okay, Getty also alleges.
Getty also alleges that Stability indirectly infringed its copyright because even if Stability AI models were trained outside of Britain, it still faces local laws if the models produced images in the country. Sandro said removing that part of its UK complaint might also make a strategic decision by Getty to focus on a similar copyright claim that's still pending in a US court.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting, the implications of this on people's individual computers that aren't hooked up online. Are they allowed to train their AI models? What are they allowed to train their AI models on things like this? A lot of these new AIs are actually working on your internal computer and not from the cloud or online. I'm specifically talking about DaVinci Resolve. One of the programs we use to edit these videos are now incorporating hardware AI and things like this that don't actually use online data.
But I think the main important rejection has to come from the people and the users, not so much from, it's important creators protect their works. Getty Images is also known for being murky and being, what's it called? Demandados. Why is this happening to me? Sued. Being sued by other photographers.
What a complex word.
It's more complex in Spanish. Being sued by actual photographers, content creators, etc. And while those lawsuits and that is important as well for the actual creators, humans, to protect their works, it's more important for the people that use it or don't use it to take a stance. Because as we've also talked about with AI and with using and just banking on being able to use these systems, your brain actually changes. We've seen this study, and there's a bunch of more research coming out about how it impacts the way you think and your ability to critically think. So I think it's more important to tell humans and people to try not to use it, even though it's very hard to, than to keep suing each other forever.
And the battle between AI and content creators is definitely coming. I kind of maybe pre-plan a little bit for this. We put ourselves, whether it's you or me, on the cover of every single thumbnail. In the short term, that would actually hurt us because we can't make the subject matter and the words as big because we're taking up a piece of the thumbnail. But that being said, once AI really starts coming into content creation, it's going to be very important to have a personal connection with your audience and for them to know that these are real people making this content so they can support real people. I know you were just recently on WDW Pro, and a lot of those creators actually use avatars and don't show their face and things like that.
And a lot of them for important reasons. Like they need to keep their anonymity so people trust them.
Yeah, you do need to keep your anonymity right now, but once AI comes in, having a face to the voice is going to be very important, and having that voice and that face on the thumbnail could also really help content creators that chose to go that way in the beginning. A lot of creators do that unintentionally, but once AI gets here, really being able to show an audience you're a real human being is going to be
Although
important.
a lot of content creators do make AI versions of themselves for the thumbnails, making a crazy face, and I'm guessing they're going to stop doing that soon. But once AI,
Why do you think they're going to stop doing that?
because they don't want it to seem like they're not real humans.
Yeah.
Because AI video already is going to continue to take over YouTube if YouTube doesn't stop it. But at the same time, they still want people to keep publishing and posting as much as they can. And AI, of course, can do it a lot faster and a lot better than humans can right now. Although it doesn't have a soul.
Well, it's very interesting because I was looking at the new DaVinci Resolve, what it can do with AI and things, and it's a bit scary. There was a video I was watching with a wedding photographer. He goes around and gets the interviews with the wedding. Sometimes they misspoke or misdid the word. So he basically trained his AI model within the DaVinci hardware on his own computer where he can speak and redo that word and it will sound like the other person's voice. Mm-hmm. So it just gives more of a polish for him as a wedding creator.
Yeah, AI will make it so, already, but so things are indistinguishable. And that's where I think, even though we do sometimes have camera errors or speak and take too long to talk like me right now, that will become important because AI can try to mimic it, but it doesn't seem authentic because AI is so perfect and the AI, not people, but the AI images are so perfect and the way they speak is so perfect that even when they try to introduce those ums or those buts, it seems not natural.
Well, that's the part. AI is really good right now.
But it'll get better.
The parts where it's trying to manufacture insecurity or flaws within the video.
Well, manufacture authenticity.
It's the point where that you're really noticing, not the authenticity. AI is pretty good at right now, especially.
No, but meaning that, the errors, the mistakes,
yeah, the
et
errors
cetera.
and the mistakes. And that's what's going to be important. And that's what a lot of content creators try to get out very often.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think maybe a lot of content creators will start editing their videos less even.
We've already seen that.
Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of content creators, and that's kind of the editing style I used to like, where they cut out every pause or there's a lot of sharp cuts just after every sentence, essentially. But you actually told me to stop doing that or to not do that because you need to make sure people know you're a human.
Yeah. Well,
and you need those pauses and those laughs and those, etc. A lot of people criticize me in my Spanish channel because I laugh a lot, but I do it kind of on purpose to make it more human.
But you're more, you hate on AI more than I do. I don't like AI either, but you really don't like it. That being said, I'm very aware as a content creator, the future and things like that. And I'm really planning for the battle where we do go against AI here. Mm-hmm. So, okay, let's continue with the last article here. And it was the third big lawsuit that kind of came in U.S. courts. And I believe this was involving Amazon, if I'm correct?
Yes. So from Reuters, Anthropic wins key U.S. ruling on AI training in author's copyright lawsuit. You always say I read like an AI.
Well, she used to do the scary AI voice, and I absolutely used to drive me crazy. And then she used to do it to annoy me. Don't do it. She called it her sexy AI voice.
No, I never said sexy.
That's what it was,
No.
and I didn't like it. It was creepy.
And one of my jobs actually made me do record the phone answering part.
Yeah.
Of like, hello, welcome to that. But a federal judge in San Francisco ruled late on Monday that Anthropic's use of books without permission to train its artificial intelligence systems
Stop the voice. Do it normal.
was legal under U.S. copyright law. Siding with tech companies on a pivotal question.
Can you reread that? I was distracted by the voice. I couldn't understand.
A federal judge in San Francisco ruled late on Monday that Anthropic's use of books without permission to train its artificial intelligence system was legal under U.S. copyright law. Siding with tech companies on a pivotal question for the AI industry, U.S. District Judge William Alsop said Anthropic made fair use of books by writers Andrea Bartz, Charles Graeber, and Kirk Wallace Johnson to train its Claude large language model.
Yeah, and this coming in, this is just kind of reiterating all these court cases had landed on the side of the corporation here, that they have the right to kind of steal these creators' content and train their AI models with it. That being said, I may not like it, but it is going to allow the U.S. to continue to compete with China. They have the advantage in AI. The only way they don't have the advantage is if the court system starts hamstringing these corporations and not letting them train their models. As a creator, it might not be good. As a government that needs AI as a weapon, I guess it is good for them.
So what happened was the writers filed a proposed class action against Anthropic last year, arguing that the company, which is backed by Amazon and Alphabet, used pirated versions of their books without permission or compensation to teach Claude to respond to human prompts. The proposed class action is one of several lawsuits brought by authors, of course. And the doctrine of fair use allows the use of copyrighted works without the copyright owner's permission in some circumstances. Fair use is a key legal defense for tech companies, and Alsop's decision is the first to address it
Why
in
is
the...
Planned Parenthood there?
It's another video about something else.
okay.
To address it in the context of generative AI.
Okay, and that's pretty much an overview of what happened this week in AI. All these lawsuits are coming out on the side of the corporation. It's setting the precedents. It's going to discourage a lot of new lawsuits that would potentially have come up. If even one of these lawsuits went the other way, you would have had a flood of individuals trying to sue for different things. But this is the way it is so far, and I kind of feel like it's going to continue to go in this direction. Before we do go on to the next subject matter, why don't we get into the comments? Rafa's got quite a few there.
Sure. Hello, Rafa. Again, Rafa says, there are some internet companies that scam users by giving away free fonts. However, they have limited license, which most people don't read, which limits use in websites. They hire the services to locate and threaten businesses that use those fonts with ridiculous amounts higher than most common font licenses.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting there.
Yeah.
They're kind of bait and switch.
Yes.
Yeah.
And... Oh, Rafa says, happened to a customer. Sorry for long messages. No, but it's interesting.
Oh, yeah. It's very interesting.
And yes, a lot of Getty also does it all the time. Even with celebrities themselves, they give copyright strikes to celebrities that use their own photographs because it's not theirs.
For some of our music and things, we were using Envato for our end segment music, and then we switched to a different,
Yeah.
what do you call it?
Music.
Asset, a different asset company that we can license music from. But when we did, we started getting hit with copyright strikes from our old videos that we used the music in.
Yeah, because we didn't change
So
them.
we actually went back to Envato because you like that one song so much.
No, it was the other way around. I had switched to Envato again, and then Epidemic Sound got mad at me, so I had to continue with Epidemic Sound because I like that one.
Okay.
So,
Okay, does he have any more comments? I see quite a few.
no, I read them all.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's one,
thank you,
one of
Rafa.
two of two.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let's go into the last subject of the day here before we go to RUMBLE, where we're going to read all the major news headlines that didn't fit into these more complex stories.
And let us know if you like this format or a more, like maybe one big story and then just go into the news for the day.
We're trying to segment for clipping. Today I did 3 stories. I think next week we're going to do 3 stories just so we can learn how to kind of segment and get comfortable with it, even if we do only end up clipping one later on. Okay. Okay, Canada's empty graves and
Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, why don't you try one of them? Because I've done 2 of them now. So this
But what do you want me to
so
say?
the title that I wrote there.
Just that?
Yeah.
Just those 4 words?
Canada's empty mass graves and burning churches.
Okay. Canada's empty...
So I'm not the only one.
I can do it. Hold on.
So hold on. Let's just let the audience know what's going on here. So I have a title that we say in the beginning of the video
wants to say in the beginning
for
of the
clips.
I say that it should be more natural, but...
But we're not going to clip these today, but we are trying to practice the formatting. So let's try it again.
Canada's mass grave hoax and burning churches. What's going on there?
Okay, let's get into the article.
No? Yes?
No.
because
It wasn't-
Canada's empty mass graves and burning churches. What? Canada's empty mass grave burning churches. But that doesn't make sense. It's not a sentence.
Canada's empty mass graves and burning churches.
You didn't put and.
Okay, well.
And it needs to be more of a sentence. What's going on with what's been happening about... No.
Why don't you try it again if you're so slick at it?
So what's been going on with Canada's mass graves?
Canada's mass graves and burning churches. Let's go into the first
I
article.
think we've said graves way too many times.
Well, that was behind the
This is what-
scenes you got there.
Yeah, this is what it's like. It used to be like trying to film
Oh my God.
edited videos.
When she first started filming, it was nuts.
in Canada or here.
In Canada.
Yeah, and then in Spanish too.
Oh.
It was very difficult.
50 times in a row, and I would be sitting in the other room. I'm like, is it a broken record? Because she was all edited videos, none of it was live.
Yeah, and now everything is live, and people still think it's edited for some reason.
Okay, so we're going to go into the mass grave hoax in Canada. We're going to kind of lay out a bunch of the data, the articles, things like that, and how that's kind of influenced and made it okay for these mass church burnings in Canada. We'll start with
Matt Walsh.
and he lays it out fairly good here. We're going to pause it quite a bit because we don't want to get dinged by the Daily Wire.
Which has happened.
They have said again and again that unmarked mass graves have been found at Canada's residential schools, which were boarding schools for Indian children that existed for about 100 years, peaking in the early 20th century. And the discovery of these unmarked mass graves
Pause it.
was significant.
Yeah, and if you don't know Matt Walsh, he is on the Daily Wire, although I don't like a lot of the creators on the Daily Wire, specifically Ben Shapiro. Matt Walsh is absolutely great, and he's one of the people that have kind of stuck with them.
Canadians were told, because Christian churches were running these residential schools.
Last year, archaeologists detected what they said could be 200 unmarked graves at this former school in Kamloops, British Columbia. Weeks later, a further 751 unmarked graves were detected across from the former Marival Residential School on the Cowesses Reserve in Saskatchewan.
More than 3 years
And this was going all across Canada. They're like, oh, we have another mass grave. We have another mass grave. We have another mass grave. 2,000 kids in this mass grave, and not one body was ever found. Actually, the evidence was completely the opposite. I'll talk more about it after the video.
later, not a single body has been found in any unmarked grave at any residential school anywhere in Canada. Turns out that, in fact, the alleged unmarked gravesite in Kamloops was in reality a 2,000-foot-long, 3-foot-deep trench that was established in 1924 as a septic field to store sewage from the school.
Okay, yeah, and this was a huge, and this is when the Canadian military said they were psyoping the general public. I believe this is one of the big psyops because I did work at a bar and I talked to a lot of people, and I had believed this for a long time. I didn't know this was fake. Then I looked into it and I'm like, what the hell? So I started asking people at the bar. Everybody's like, no, it's real, it's real. One person knew it was fake, and then I really dug into the research in depth, and the whole thing was a big fraud, and they made billion-dollar payouts to Indian tribes just before the election. First Nation tribes. I call them Indian. Indian tribes before the election in order to sway certain segments of the voter base and things like this.
And also, pretty early on, independent creator who I don't always love, but Lauren Southern actually did a whole expose and documentary about it. And they try to get it canceled. They try to not show it, but in it, from the very beginning, essentially, she goes and tries to ask and tries to see what the research, how they were doing the research, what they were doing, and the tools that they were using were not actually for detecting any kind of human remains or body parts.
And when I was grabbing the articles for this story, trying to get clips, articles, different things talking about this subject matter, it was very interesting. People are still trying to propagate this lie on X, putting articles from 5 years ago up, and then I would go to the comments. Everybody in the comments is just lambasting them. A lot of people that do watch independent media now are educated on this particular subject, but in Canada, the mainstream media has really held the line on this, and I'm surprised how ignorant the Canadian public is, considering this is a worldwide hoax based out of Canada.
And also, in the entire rest of the world, even people that Mexican people that I would talk about this with, they knew and they were aware when the news came out that they hadn't found anything, that it was probably a hoax, that it wasn't true. People here knew about it, but not in Canada. Not the people that we would try to tell and talk about. They would still be in it.
Well, they try to go a step further. Right before this thing fell apart, I would say it was about 3 months before mainstream media and the rest of the world picked this up. They try to make it a hate crime to say that these mass graves were a hoax, and then that you were going to be get mass fines and jail time if you said this was a hoax. And they were trying to pass that. Luckily, the whole thing kind of fell apart, and even though the Canadian government's still trying to hold this up as truth, they're not putting people in jail for saying it's a hoax, but they were that close.
And they also did a whole holiday around it. There's a one day called, or I think it's called Orange Shirt Day. Yeah. But everybody wears an orange shirt. They sell them everywhere, from London Drugs, which is like a Walgreens, to every store sells them. And you will see that day most people actually wearing them, protests going on. And even the year before we left, they were still selling them.
Well, they weren't
the
only
date.
just selling them. I worked in a bar in downtown Vancouver, so it is a bubble. On an Orange Shirt Day, all the girls came in orange shirts, and you would hear them just jibber-jabbering about how this is wrong. I can't believe Canada. Every single year, and it was even more the last year, because I think they understood there was starting to be pushback. So on that Orange Shirt Day, these progressive had to come out in force and let the whole public know what was really going on.
Yes.
Okay, let's go into the next part of this mass grave hoax. And this is an article that was kind of coming out when the government was portraying this to the general public, and this was the narrative they were trying to sell to the general public. None of this is really true anymore. So,
and it's interesting that it stops here, because after that it's just a blank page. So did they delete it? Was this a link that you can't click on anymore?
It says 2024 now, so they probably deleted a lot of the article because they could have been sued for it.
So it said, what lies beneath Canada's former Indigenous school sites fuels a debate. The revelation convulsed all of Canada. Ground-penetrating radar, that's the technology that didn't actually detect anything, had found possible signs of 215 unmarked graves at a former residential school in British Columbia run by the Catholic Church that the government had once used to assimilate Indigenous children forcibly taken from their families. It was the first of some 80 former schools where indications of possible unmarked graves were discovered, and it produced a wave of sorrow and shock in a country that has long struggled with its legacy of its treatment of Indigenous people. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau ordered flags to fly at half staff, as many Canadians wore orange T-shirts with the slogan "Every Child Matters."
And that was the gist of the entire narrative. And there were tentacles upon tentacles upon tentacles of this narrative that would reach into communities. For instance, the art gallery, they completely took over one side of the art gallery, set up a teepee, barriers, refused to leave, put children's shoes along with fake blood on the ground, and were passing out pamphlets. This was one of the biggest tourist areas within downtown Vancouver. So we would very often shoot movies in that area, and because I work for the movie company, I would basically get to watch them all day. And the amount of tourists that would come up and just be absolutely shocked by what was going on and taking their propaganda flyers. This is how they were able to orchestrate this on a global scale.
Yeah, and they essentially took over that half block for, what was it, 2 years almost? Yeah.
Years. Okay.
And they would also get pretty tense when you would ask them about it. And I did see them yell at a bunch of people bunch of different times and hand out propaganda.
Let's go into the map now.
Oh, the map or the Daily Wire?
What's the next part of the story that you have?
Well, the actual conclusion of the story from the Daily Wire. After 4 years of searching and zero bodies found, Canada cuts funds on search for unmarked mass graves. A committee and nonprofit searching for alleged remains said their funding has been cut.
Yes,
this was this year.
They paid out hundreds of billions of dollars. It was an insane amount of money they paid out on the back of this hoax to Indian tribes all across Canada. But then they said they were going to do an investigation. They knew if they did that investigation what was there. Privately, I believe some of this was dug up, and the Canadian government wanted nothing to do with it, because those payouts they made and that narrative and those lies they sold to the entire Canadian public that they're still trying to sell to this day would completely fall apart.
And those steps are actually the Vancouver Art Gallery, where they had this display that lasted for years.
Yep.
Canada is pulling funds from groups still searching for alleged bodies buried at Indigenous residential schools funded by Catholics and other Christians. An organization and a committee of experts formed to search for the elusive remains have both lost funding in the past month following 4 years of searches that have found 0 remains.
The elusive remains.
The Survivors Secretariat and the committee both say they have lost funding this year, the CBC reported. One of the committee's founding members, Crystal Gale Fraser, told the outlet in mid-February that the National Advisory Committee on Residential Schools, Missing Children and Unmarked Burials would have to stop operating when its current funding agreement expires at the end of March. Around the same time, the leader of the Survivors Secretariat, Laura Arendt, that lady.
Well, this is the thing. If they wanted to dig up these bodies that are supposedly there, which is tens of thousands of kids they're claiming at this point, they would have funding. All that you would have to do is make a GoFundMe, and the independent public would donate to this. I would donate to this because I want to see all these supposed bodies that are there. I know there's not a single one that is there. They have claimed that a former graveyard is these bodies, so you would get bodies out of the graveyard, but it's been shown through sleuth research from independent media that there was actually a graveyard there before. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like an actual graveyard.
An actual graveyard, not of kids, but of regular people.
And this is interesting because Aaron told the outlet that she had warned the government in December that her organization was nearly out of money, but was denied additional funding on January 23rd. The denial said her organization had $4.2 million in unspent funds, a claim Aaron denied. So where is this money going? What was it used for, and why are they running out of it?
Well, it's funny. They're trying to claim we're the victim. The government's not giving us more money, even though they've already given billions of dollars out to this situation.
Yeah, I can say how much.
There's no bodies there. Everybody knows there's no bodies there, and now you're trying to say, well, there is bodies, but you're going to stop funding us, so we'll never really know.
So the CBC noted that Aaron's organization received around $10.3 million since 2021 from Canada's $320 million Residential Schools Missing Children Fund. The Canadian government says the group spent around $6.1 million during that time, while the organization claims it spent $8.5. That still leaves them with $2.5 million, but they face a dispute with the Canadian government about whether some expenditures are seen as legitimate under the funding program's conditions. So again, what are they using it for?
Yeah, and a lot of articles quote that this lie went on for like 4 or 5 years. We lived in Canada, maybe because we were on the ground. This was like more of a 6 or 7 year hoax that was portrayed. It didn't get out to the wider public until after the first couple of years. Mm-hmm. Let's go into the consequences of making a hoax like this for a country. And it was Christian churches were burned down in mass. Mm-hmm. And it was a thing that it was okay to do. Even the government wouldn't speak up against these Christian churches being burned down. And when they were specifically asked about it, they almost brushed it away like, oh, a lot of people are angry what went on in these Indigenous schools, and they're just trying to vent and get out their emotion, things like that. It was ridiculous what the Canadian government was saying. They were standing up for these children that were supposedly there that ended up never being there, and when all these churches were burned down, nothing was said about it.
And this is from Juno News, which is independent Canadian media. So Canada's church arson crisis, and these little dots are all either one or several churches burned in those locations. The chilling reality is out in the open. 118 Christian churches across Canada have been vandalized, burned to the ground, or desecrated. And to this day, there has been no national inquiry called to address this national crisis. Many Canadians are completely unaware of the true scale of these attacks. This isn't just a statistic. It's an ongoing catastrophe that deserves the nation's attention.
1 second. A lot of people are now thinking that this mass grave hoax was directly so they could justify the war on Christianity in Canada. This isn't the only thing that's going on with Christianity in Canada, these 118 church burnings, but the government is now coming out and saying if any church speaks up against abortion and comes out as pro-life, they're going to take away their no-profit standing and take away their licensing and things like this. They are trying to get rid of Christian churches that are independent or want to actually teach the Bible. These churches that are globalist or are tattered in LGBTQ flags and everything like that, they're completely fine with. They're trying to get rid of these independent churches. One way was with the burnings. The next way is to take away their licensing and tax-exempt status. Okay, let's continue with that Judo News article before we go to RUM BLE.
So the wave of violence against Christian communities erupted after the controversial discovery of unmarked graves near a residential school in Kamloops, BC. While the First Nation itself has called these findings anomalies and hasn't confirmed whether they are even graves, the media storm that followed unleashed a wave of anti-Christian hatred. Far-left extremists used this as a rallying cry, launching a brutal and relentless series of attacks on Catholic and Christian communities, many of which were even encouraged by apathetic left-wing politicians. And a lot of the destruction that actually happened to a lot of these churches were churches that were located in or were part of First Nations communities themselves. So they were burning down churches for people and of people that they were supposedly saving or helping.
And a lot of these churches had community outreach where they had food programs, shelter programs, clothing programs for the less fortunate and things like this. When that kind of disappears, it makes it even harder on the communities they're trying to help. Mm-hmm. Okay, if there are any comments, let's read them, and then we'll go to RUMBLE.
Rafa says, are those bodies here in the room with us right now? No, and they were not in the graves either.
But there was a lot of shoes on the steps of the Vancouver Art Gallery claiming that there was.
Yes, 250 of them. Plus teddy bears, and it would rain 24/7 in Vancouver, and all of those things and teddy bears and stuff would get wet
and moldy,
and moldy, and it would stink. So the whole Vancouver Art Gallery area would stink because they left it out there for a very long time.
All right, and thanks for tuning in to us on YouTube. We're going to head over to RUMBLE to give the headlines of the day, less large story structured segments, and more just all the big headlines that are kind of going on and kind of the stuff that we can't maybe talk about on YouTube because of censorship.
Yes.
If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Be one of the first 1,000 subscribers. That first 1,000 is the most important because that's what helps us get towards monetization so we can do this more long term.
Yes.
Okay.
So
we'll see you over on RUMBLE. Okay, let me log out there and log in on
Let me X out of there.